She had practiced for months, her voice echoing through tiny rooms where no one cared to listen. The school's talent show was supposed to be her chance, a stage where finally her voice could rise above the whispers. But when she arrived in her simple dress, the judges smirked. Some even tried to stop her, saying, "This isn't your place." The audience laughed before she even sang a single note. But then, as the lights dimmed and her voice filled the hall, the same people who mocked her froze in silence. By the time she finished, every eye was wet, every heart shaken, and the standing ovation that followed was the revenge she never asked for. In a small town where traditions weighed heavily and privilege defined worth, the school auditorium stood tall as a place of pride. Every year, the annual talent show wasn't just about entertainment. It was a ladder of recognition. Those who performed became stars for the night, often catching the attention of influential families in the audience. Winning meant more than applause. It meant opportunity. Amara, a black girl from the outskirts of town, lived far from the glittering neighborhoods where most of the contestants came from. Her mother worked long shifts as a nurse, and her father juggled multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. Despite the hardships, music was always alive in their home. Amara's voice wasn't just beautiful. It carried something rare, a raw honesty that stirred hearts. From childhood, she had sung in the church choir, her voice soaring above the others, filling the pews with warmth. Neighbors often stopped outside the church just to listen, whispering about the gift this young girl possessed. But beyond her community, few acknowledged her. At school, she was rarely invited to join activities. Teachers, though polite, rarely encouraged her to take the stage. The unwritten rule was clear. Girls like Amara belonged in the background, never the spotlight. When the talent show was announced that year, Amara hesitated. She had been practicing a song she wrote herself, a melody inspired by her late grandmother, who always told her, "Your voice will break chains one day." Her grandmother had passed before ever hearing Amara sing at an official stage, and Amara carried that dream for her. She filled out the form quietly, slipping it into the submission box without telling anyone except her parents. Her classmates were quick to discover her name on the list. Whispers turned into chuckles, chuckles into cruel laughter. "She thinks she can compete with us." One girl sneered in the hallway. "This isn't church singing. This is real competition." Others laughed and spread rumors that she was only trying to get attention. But Amara didn't let the cruelty stop her. Every evening after school, she walked home, dropped her heavy backpack on the couch, and stood by the window with her notebook. She sang until her voice grew hoarse, pouring every ounce of her soul into practice. Her parents supported her quietly, never telling her to dream smaller, though they feared the prejudice she would face. The night before the show, Amara laid out her only decent dress, a plain but neat navy blue outfit her mother had carefully ironed. It wasn't sparkling or fashionable like what the others would wear, but it was hers. The day of the event arrived. The auditorium buzzed with excitement. Families filled the rows, their chatter echoing through the hall. The wealthier students came in dazzling costumes, glittering under the stage lights, boasting about the songs and dances they had prepared. When Amara's name was called during the roll, some in the crowd groaned, others exchanged knowing looks. Even one of the teachers whispered to another, "She won't last 5 minutes up there." Amara sat quietly in her seat, her heart pounding. She tried to drown out the voices with memories of her grandmother's encouragement. She told herself this stage was for her too, even if nobody else believed it. But as the performances began, she noticed something unsettling. Several teachers kept glancing her way, as if trying to decide whether to even let her perform. During intermission, she overheard 2 students snickering. "They'll probably cut her off before she starts." Imagine saving the audience from that disaster. Amara clenched her fists but said nothing. Instead, she closed her eyes, whispered a prayer, and waited for her turn. Little did anyone know, the performance that was about to unfold would change not just the night, but the way the entire town remembered her. The auditorium lights dimmed again as the intermission ended. The host, a cheerful teacher who seemed oblivious to the quiet tension in the room, stepped onto the stage with a wide smile. He announced the next performers, students who had rehearsed tirelessly, many of them already popular among the crowd. The acts that followed sparkled with confidence. A girl in a glittering gown danced across the stage with choreographed precision. A boy in a suit performed a stand-up comedy routine that had the parents laughing louder than the students. The energy in the hall was electric, but it wasn't all joy. It was competition, pride, and unspoken hierarchy. Mara sat quietly, her notebook clutched tightly in her lap. She had written her lyrics on its last page, though she already knew them by heart. The words were carved into her soul. But as each performer dazzled the crowd, she felt smaller and smaller, as though her plain dress and trembling hands would never measure up. Finally, the host looked at the card in his hand, his tone shifting just slightly as he announced, "Next, we have Amara, singing an original piece." The moment her name echoed through the speakers, a ripple of murmurs spread across the auditorium. A few people clapped politely, but others muttered under their breath. One boy from the back row whispered loud enough for others to hear, "Here comes the maid's daughter." Laughter followed. Amara stood slowly, her knees weak. She walked up the stairs toward the stage, the bright lights blinding her as the whispers grew louder. From the corner of her eye, she saw a group of girls smirking, shaking their heads as if certain she would embarrass herself. When she reached the microphone, she adjusted it carefully, her hands trembling. The hall was silent now, but it wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of doubt. She opened her mouth to begin, but before she could sing a note, someone in the audience coughed dramatically, followed by another student whispering, "This is going to be painful." A ripple of laughter filled the room. The humiliation burned in her chest, and for a moment she wanted to run off stage. Her legs screamed to move, to escape the sea of eyes piercing into her. But then she remembered her grandmother's words. "Your voice will break chains one day." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the first note escape her lips. The sound was soft at first, delicate, almost fragile. A few people chuckled, but as her voice gained strength, the room shifted. The melody swelled with emotion, her words carrying years of pain, hope, and resilience. The lyrics spoke of chains and freedom, of silence and rising, of shadows and light. The laughter faded into stunned quiet. Every note pierced through the prejudice that had weighed against her, silencing the cruel voices one by one. Her song soared higher, filling every corner of the auditorium. The teachers sat frozen, their eyes widening as if hearing her for the first time. Parents leaned forward in their seats, captivated. Even the students who mocked her moments before were now staring, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. Her voice cracked once, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of her emotion. Tears welled in her eyes, but she kept going. She sang not just for herself, but for every time she had been told she didn't belong. For her parents who sacrificed everything. For her grandmother who believed in her. By the time she reached the final verse, the silence in the room was so complete that the sound of her breath between lines echoed like thunder. Her last note rang out, long and unwavering, hanging in the air like a prayer. Then, silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The audience seemed suspended between disbelief and awe. And then slowly it began, a single clap. Then another, until the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause. Students who once laughed now stood to their feet. Parents wiped tears from their eyes. Teachers who doubted her exchanged guilty looks, realizing they had nearly denied the stage to the most powerful performance of the night. Amara stood there, chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had turned humiliation into triumph, pain into beauty. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, they all saw her, but little did she know. The real storm was yet to come. Because while the audience applauded, not everyone was happy to see her shine. And some were already plotting to make sure she never stood on that stage again. The applause thundered through the auditorium, echoing off the high ceilings, as if the walls themselves recognized Amara's triumph. She stood frozen at the center of the stage, hardly able to process what had just happened. The same people who mocked her minutes ago were now clapping, standing, even whistling. For a brief, shining moment, she felt weightless, as if every scar, every whisper, every humiliation had melted into nothing, but not everyone was applauding. In the third row, a cluster of wealthy parents sat stiffly, their faces pinched with disapproval. They hadn't expected the maid's daughter to outshine their children. Their sons and daughters had come dressed in silk and sequins, rehearsed under the finest coaches money could buy, yet here was Amara, in a simple navy dress, with no background music or props, commanding the room. To those parents, her victory wasn't inspiring. It was threatening, and their children felt the sting even sharper. Among them was Mariah, the school's golden girl, who had danced earlier in a glittering red gown. She was used to admiration, used to being the star, but now the whispers around her weren't about her flawless pirouettes. They were about Amara's voice. The shift was unbearable. As the applause raged on, Mariah leaned toward her friends, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Watch," she whispered. "Let's see how long this little fairy tale lasts." When Amara stepped down from the stage, her heart was pounding, her legs trembling like she had run a marathon. Teachers she thought barely noticed her before now patted her shoulder, mumbling things like, "Well done" and "impressive." For a second, she believed she had truly broken through the wall that separated her from everyone else. Then came the announcement. The judges would deliberate and announce the winner after a short break. Excitement buzzed in the air, but Amara felt something else creeping in, the sharp, cold stares of Mariah and her friends. She retreated to the dressing room backstage, where performers waited nervously. The room was crowded with laughter, chatter, and the rustle of costumes, but as soon as she entered, silence fell. A few students shifted uncomfortably, others looked away. And then Mariah stood, her sequined gown shimmering under the fluorescent light. "Well," Mariah began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "That was surprising." Her friends chuckled, waiting for the dagger to drop. "But let's be honest," Mariah continued. "That wasn't talent, it was pity applause. People felt sorry for you. That's why they clapped." Amara's stomach knotted, but she stayed silent. Another girl chimed in. "You really think anyone's going to remember your little church song after tonight? Please, this is a show, not a charity case." Laughter erupted around her. Amara tried to steady her breathing, clutching her notebook like a shield. She wanted to remind herself that she had already won something bigger than their approval, but the cruelty didn't stop. Mariah took a step closer, her voice lowering. "Here's what you don't understand, Amara. People like you don't belong on that stage. You got lucky tonight, but luck runs out." Then with a smirk, she flicked her hand, and in one swift motion, one of her friends yanked Amara's notebook from her grasp. "Hey!" Amara gasped, reaching for it, but they were quicker. They flipped through the pages, reading her handwritten lyrics aloud in mocking tones. "Chains and freedom, shadows and light. Oh my God, this is hilarious." The girls cackled as they tore a page out and crumpled it. "Give it back," Amara cried, her voice trembling with desperation. But they only laughed harder, holding the notebook high, out of reach. One of them even pretended to sing her song in an exaggerated, squeaky voice, turning it into a cruel parody. Tears welled in Amara's eyes, not because they mocked her words, but because those pages were sacred to her, the only place she had ever poured out her heart. Finally, with a sudden surge of courage, she lunged forward and snatched the notebook from Mariah's hands. Her grip was fierce, her knuckles white. "Don't touch it again," she said firmly, her voice shaking but strong. For a moment, the room froze. The laughter died. Mariah's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of shock. No one had ever dared to stand up to her before, but the silence didn't last. Mariah's eyes narrowed, her pride wounded. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think one song makes you special? You're nothing. And I'll make sure everyone remembers it." She stormed out of the room, her friends trailing behind, whispering and glaring. Amara sank into a chair, clutching her notebook to her chest, her body trembling. She could still hear the echo of their laughter, still feel the sting of their words. But beneath the fear, something else burned, a fire she didn't know she had. When the final performances ended and the judges returned to the stage, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The host stepped forward, holding the envelope with the winner's name. Tonight's first place goes to... He paused, letting the suspense build. Amara. The room exploded with applause once more, louder than before. Students gasped, parents clapped. Even teachers smiled with genuine pride. Amara stood frozen, her mind struggling to process it. She had done it. She had won. But as she walked toward the stage to accept her award, she caught Mariah's eyes in the crowd. They were burning, not with tears, but with rage. The cheers filled her ears, the trophy felt heavy in her hands, but deep down, Amara knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a battle, because in a world that had always tried to silence her, her voice had finally risen above them all. And now they would do anything to drag her back down. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as Amara stood on stage, the trophy gleaming in her trembling hands. The spotlight warmed her face, but what truly burned inside her was the realization she had broken through. For the first time, the walls of doubt and prejudice that surrounded her had cracked. She glanced at the audience and spotted her parents in the back row. Her mother's eyes glistened with tears, and her father clapped so hard his palms must have stung. Pride radiated from them, pride born not of wealth or status, but of love and sacrifice. That alone made her victory more meaningful than the applause. But even as cheers filled the air, a chill lingered. Mariah sat stiffly among the rows, her face set in stone. While the rest of the hall celebrated Amara's triumph, Mariah's narrowed eyes held a storm of envy. Her friends whispered furiously, already plotting the next move. When the ceremony ended, Amara was swarmed with congratulations. Strangers patted her back. Students who had mocked her days ago suddenly wanted to stand beside her. Teachers gushed about her hidden talent, though she knew they had never truly seen her until tonight. Wonderful performance, Amara, one said, almost sheepishly, as if making up for years of dismissal. Amara smiled politely, but in her heart she knew the truth. These weren't her friends. Their praise was shallow, born of awe, not respect. The same voices that cheered now would have stayed silent, or worse if she had failed. Backstage, as she packed her notebook into her bag, the room emptied around her. She was the last to leave. The trophy, heavy and cold in her hand, felt like both a prize and a burden. She had won the night, but at what cost? She didn't have to wait long to find out. The following week at school, the aftermath of her victory unfolded. On the surface, her performance had earned her admiration. Students whispered her name in hallways, some shyly asking about her song, others replaying grainy recordings captured on their phones. For the first time, Amara wasn't invisible, but admiration quickly turned into resentment. Some students, jealous of her sudden fame, whispered that the judges had only chosen her to make a point. Others spread rumors that her parents had begged for pity votes. Mariah led the charge, her bitterness simmering into open hostility. She organized her circle of friends, twisting the narrative at every turn. Amara didn't win because she's talented, Mariah sneered one afternoon in the cafeteria, loud enough for the room to hear. She won because everyone felt sorry for her. That wasn't a performance, it was charity. The words stung, but Amara refused to show it. She carried herself with quiet strength, even when the laughter followed her from classroom to classroom. Yet she wasn't immune to the loneliness that crept in at night. At home, when the noise of the day faded, she would sit by her window, clutching her notebook. The joy of her victory had been real, but so was the cruelty that followed. Was her voice strong enough to keep breaking through? Then came the turning point. Weeks later, the school hosted a community night where parents and townspeople were invited to see the students' talents. At first, Amara wasn't planning to perform. The thought of standing on that stage again, under the scrutiny of people who still doubted her, filled her with dread. But her parents encouraged her. "You don't sing for them," her mother reminded her. "You sing for yourself, for the gift you've been given, and for your grandmother, who believed in you." With trembling hands, Amara signed up again. The night of the event, the auditorium was packed tighter than before. Word of her talent had spread beyond the school. Curious neighbors, skeptical townspeople, even strangers who had heard whispers of the girl with the voice filled the seats. The weight of their expectations pressed against her chest. Mariah was there too, of course, watching from the front row with arms crossed, her friends smirking at her side. When Amara's name was called, she walked onto the stage with steady steps. This time, she carried not just her notebook, but her grandmother's scarf draped over her shoulders, a silent reminder of where her strength came from. The murmurs rose as she took the microphone. Some whispered encouragement, others scoffed. But Amara blocked them out. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and began. Her voice, richer and stronger than before, filled the hall. It carried not just melody but truth, an unshakable declaration of who she was and where she belonged. She sang of resilience, of rising after every fall, of chains breaking and voices soaring. Each note was a defiance, each lyric a blade cutting through the prejudice around her. By the time her song ended, the audience was transformed. Some sat frozen, their eyes wide. Others wept openly. When the final note faded, the silence was heavy, not of doubt, but of reverence. Then came the applause. Louder than before, deeper, more genuine. Parents stood, neighbors clapped until their palms burned. And even those who once doubted her couldn't deny the truth. Amara wasn't just talented, she was extraordinary. For the first time, Mariah's smirk faltered. The mask of superiority slipped, revealing insecurity beneath. She realized the battle was lost, not because Amara had humiliated her, but because Amara no longer needed their approval. Amara walked off stage, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She didn't win a trophy this time, but what she gained was far greater. Respect that couldn't be stolen, strength that couldn't be mocked, a voice that no one could silence. From that night on, she was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was Amara, the girl who sang her truth, the girl who stood tall when others tried to break her, the girl who silenced an entire hall with nothing but her song. And in the quiet of her room, as she carefully tucked her notebook away, she whispered to herself, "Grandma was right. My voice will break chains one day." Impact and takeaway, Amara's story spread far beyond her school. She became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that true talent and courage can't be buried by prejudice. The same people who once laughed at her began to respect her, and even those who never liked her could no longer deny the power of her voice. Her victory wasn't just about winning a talent show. It was about rewriting her place in a world that had tried to silence her. She had proved that no matter how many times they pushed her down, her voice would always rise higher. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't anger or cruelty. It's simply being unstoppable.